Welcome to the Bruno and Linzio transmission number 11. We are here to address your issues. Linzio, how are you today?
Sto bene, grazie Bruno. Complimenti della stagione a te.
Compliments of the season. Is that some kind of politically correct way of saying Merry Christmas?
That's a long-standing alternative to, if you get fed up with saying Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, you say compliments of the season. Far be it from me to be politically correct. That would be a first.
Yes, that would ruin your reputation. So, I'm going to read out some of the comments we've received recently. So, I'll keep one of the question on objectivism for later. So let's start with something a little less, a little easier. So a certain classical liberal warrior has commented saying, I wish to tell people who were pro-liberty and would identify themselves as libertarian or capitalist or liberal or some such, not conservative, nationalist, populist, etc. The battle for words is the battle for the fate of the world. Wow. Powerful words.
Well, he's right in a way, and George Orwell said, ultimately, whoever controls the language controls the culture. But I don't think it's helpful at the moment to use terms like libertarian, classical liberal, and capitalist, and so on. Yes, we're all of those things, but primarily the battle we face at the moment is the battle for Western civilization. It's the battle for all of those things, and we know that Western civilization is not perfectly libertarian. It does not conform perfectly to Galt's speech. But as far as I'm concerned, we can leave that aside for now. We have to regroup, hit the reset button, get Western civilization back, because we've been backsliding to the point where to have these arguments about do we say libertarian or objectivist or capitalist doesn't help. Everyone has to get a sense of urgency about the fact that our civilization itself is going under, and we should do our level best to get it back.
Yes, I would agree with that. I don't think it's accurate either. Because, yeah, maybe conservative is a little wishy-washy, populist is wishy-washy, but nationalist refers to something very specific. That's you're against globalism, you're for the nation state, and capitalist, liberal, libertarian, and so forth have always been kind of squeamish about the nation state, especially in objectivist slash objectivist circles. It's always been regarded as something to be weary of, and Trump was depicted as the big bad old nationalist, just as the mainstream media depicted him, you know, as the new Nazi whatever. So I like the word nationalist.
So do I. I think we need to embrace it profoundly and proudly in the current context. I know in the past we've been wary of it because of its collectivist undertones. I think we tended to equate it with blind worship of the state, the nation state, any nation state, regardless of whether it was a rights-respecting state or not. But I think, again, we're in the situation now that to preserve Western civilization means to preserve the nation states that make it up. For all their imperfections, we still have the freedom to go to work on those. But we must not let them be overrun by alien forces, and in particular the religion of Islam, which is what is happening, and it's happening with the blessing, God help us, of institutes that you'd expect to be bulwarks against it, such as the Ayn Rand Institute, the Objectivists, whom you mentioned. The night of Trump's election, Yawan Book put out a tweet saying we must now pivot. I hate that term, run a mile. When anyone talks about pivoting, you know there's some BS to follow.
The only pivot I know is the basketball, is the pivot in basketball, because I used to be a pivot. That's actually one of the positions on the court where you know, one of the players. I know New Zealand probably isn't very big on basketball, so we'll skip over that.
Well, no, yes, I certainly know what you're talking about, and that to be a basketballer, you have to be about 8 feet tall, and you are, so that all makes perfect sense. Anyway, back to Yawan's pivot. He wanted to pivot from fighting socialism to fighting nationalism, because Donald Trump, the Bulgarian, had just been elected. And well, that's interesting. And when we look back in hindsight, I think we've learned quite a lot since Trump's election about the Ayn Rand Institute and what their agenda was. It wasn't really as clear leading up to the election as it has been subsequently. So I would just say we must actually pivot back to fighting socialism and Islam, cultural Marxism, Islamo-Marxism, and embrace nationalism. Rational nationalism, of course, not blind worship of a particular, or our particular nation states just because they're there, but recognizing the great traditions that we've had the huge good fortune to be raised in, and to make sure that they get preserved and enhanced.
Well, if you compare if you compare our nation states with the rest of the world, and the globalists want to unite us with that rest of the world, well then, my goodness, they all look like the perfect Galt's Gulch in comparison. And
Yes.
that's one of the differences between, you know, why I would use the term nationalism, because someone like Yawan Book, he would move to China. He would move to Puerto Rico, as long as the taxes are to his favor. That's the kind of person we're dealing with. While I value Western civilization per se as Western civilization.
Mm.
So that's a big difference. I'm not just gonna pack and move to Hong Kong because it has a 5% flat tax or some idiotic thing such as that, because it's not the West. So I value the West qua West. Even France, for example.
But
All right.
Italy's better.
Oh, Italy is always better than France. People should know this. All right, so next comment. So someone XL8 says, I contemplated taking a gender studies course once as a part of another course I was doing. Fortunately, I had more important courses to do. Besides that, I would say less government involvement, especially via funding, in educational institutions will result in better quality education and better overall outcomes. So he's referring to the fact that I said we should purge the universities because they're state universities. So the state should have the power to do so. Well, as far as the gender studies, I might actually take that if it were if it were available in a more rational country such as Italy. It is not available, but I would take it just to see what the hell they are talking about.
Well, I don't think I would. I, I find the whole thing so tiresome. You can't move, you can't turn on television, you can't go on the internet without you're encountering this. People make such a song and dance about whether they're male or female or non-binary or part of the XYZ part of LGBTQ or whatever it is now. It really is so boring. Just, you've got the right to live your life as you choose. Just get on with it. Stop going on and on and on about it. But of course they it's a weapon to tyrannize the rest of humanity with. It's not enough that it be legal. They want it to be compulsory. And then you'll have a ban on heterosexuality. And
Yes, I think that's one of the reasons the globalists like it. We know they've always been talking about overpopulation and so forth. So if these weirdos that keep adding to the list, as if anybody cares in the first place. Nobody cares.
yes,
And if you have a house, you have a home, just close the bedroom and do whatever. I mean, nobody's
yes.
going to stop you, but you have to go in the streets and parade, half naked and with all this disgusting stuff. No, that's just gross.
What makes people interesting are the things they choose, which means the things they do have control over. Now, I think with sexual orientation and all the rest, that's not something we have control over, and therefore it's of no interest. It's of interest from a legal and philosophical point of view if certain activities are forbidden by the state, and we would argue the state has no business forbidding any consenting activity among adults. End of story. Now, in New Zealand, we certainly have that. But we now have the odd spectacle of people holding parades, the Pride Parade next year, and some of the participants are refusing to participate if any queer policemen or women parade in their uniforms, because the uniform is offensive. And there's a major schism occurring in our LGBTQRSTUVWXYZ community.
So the police uniform isn't universally considered sexy. The queers don't like it.
I'm sure some of them do think it's sexy, but the point, I suppose, is that for most of this country's history, you could be arrested by a policeman or woman for doing unseemly things with members of your own sex, and so I suppose some of them are going to feel, what's the term, triggered.
Right, triggered.
And I don't know how that's resolved.
Very apropos.
It has been resolved. I don't know what the status of the parade is. They might just cancel it. Rather like the ugly women's march in the States, they're cancelling those left, right and centre because they're having ferocious internecine arguments among those who support Islam and those who do not. I can't imagine how anyone purporting to uphold women's rights can be supportive of Islam, but we all know about Linda Sarsour and her colleagues, and in any event, that again has caused a major schism in the women's movement. What we need, though, is mass movement like that in favour of Western civilization. We need people swarming the streets of Washington, a mass movement. Western civilization, reset, build that wall, expel the United Nations, withdraw from the United Nations, form a league of civilized nations, such as I've discussed in previous episodes, moratorium on immigration, close the universities.
Yes,
See,
and
they must have
Canada will
demand
not be
non-stop.
invited. Canada will
Who?
not be invited in the group.
Who
No
won't?
Canada.
Oh, no Canadians. Good Lord, no. No, and build the wall on the northern border as well.
Yes, Canada can become part of the civilized nations only after they get rid of Trudeau, not before.
Yes. I'm not
Well,
sure when they're due to, when their next elections are due, but I think I was reading that Trudeau electorally is in trouble. So it might be reasonable to hope that he is about to be replaced.
well. So, the next comment refers to the quote you brought up a few last episode. So, he says, this is Anarchist History of New Zealand. He says, very good, quote. The idea that as two-legged human creatures all possess certain intrinsic value by the mere fact of having been born in the shape of men, not apes, page 104 of the journals. This is to understand the feels over reals upsurge in our time. Why do kids get participation awards rather than achievement awards? Why can you be what you quote unquote identify as being in terms of sex rather than what you are? Why can you have a pet dog or pet immigrant as interchangeably as children of your own? Why is it just as good to send those children to attach to a nanny or daycare rather than raise them yourself? Why not marry and include in your community people who don't share your values? Are they not in the shape of men too? Why not let criminals out of the jails and have them vote in general elections? Are you saying they're apes? All of this comes from a lack of identity, so everyone must be the same, and matters only decided by signaling and offense, feelings, and vibes. There is now a mainstream of people who do not view others as individuals, but simply as interchangeable, homogeneous units. Toohey has done his work well. Okay, well that last sentence was a little convoluted, but I think we got the gist of it. So,
So who posted that?
um, I'm not, his YouTube handle is Anarchist History of New Zealand. I don't know his real name.
No, I don't know who that is. I think he or he has uh, posted just about with every video. So we had one conscientious follower. But I just love that quote about Tui, and I came across it not long after we had our first little skirmish about my use of the term subhuman, and then I came across that. And I threw the book in the air and said, hey, wait till I tell Bruno about this.
Oh, goodness gracious. Well, I have a comment on regarding, this quote unquote using pet immigrants as interchangeably as children. Just this morning, I read in the news that the city of Milan has about 800 or so unaccompanied minor migrants. So they don't know what to do with them, and so they're asking the Milanese to take them in to their homes. And so far, a grand total of 11 families for the 800 migrant children have come forward. So maybe this need for migrant children in the family is not as deeply felt in Italy as it is elsewhere.
Well, you clearly need to be educated in the ways of the United Nations Global Migration Compact. I notice, in fact, Italy didn't sign it. One of the few countries sensible enough not to go near it. United States didn't sign it. I think they were going to, and then once Trump got wind of it. He said, "Over my dead body." But New Zealand has signed it. This is a compact that is supposedly non-binding, but the signatories commit to taking in specified numbers of migrants and making them welcome. Among the other countries that haven't signed, Switzerland, Latvia, Bulgaria, Austria, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, Hungary, Liechtenstein, Romania, Singapore, Chile, and of course Israel. But you know what happened? This was signed in Marrakesh in Morocco, and it was just after this had been signed that the beheadings occurred by Muslims of the two Swedish tourist girls, and those savages put up a video of the beheading, which you've seen it, I think, and it went viral and has caused fresh, righteous outrage, as well it might. And I think some more people are now woke to the nature of Islam. They're not behaving at odds with their religion at all. They're obeying it. That is what they're exhorted to do by their religion, and they are behaving in accordance with it. And that's the fact about Islam that we all need to be aware of. And New Zealand really ought to pull out of this global migration compact, and every other country that signed up to it. We all know the situation in Britain, where one now is to arrest people who say things critical of Islam on Twitter or Facebook. We're not that bad yet, but there's a concerted effort to criminalize criticism of Islam. There's a concerted effort going on here in Britain, Britonistan. It is already criminalized. So don't you go that way in Italy, and I'll do my best to make sure we don't hear.
Yeah, well, I've had time to cool off after watching part of that video. The feeling is hardly describable. Let's just say I was not pleased, and it just enrages you, because what are you going to do about it? Nothing. There's nothing you individually can do about it. So what we can do is keep our politicians accountable for what they do, and vote for people like these terrible nationalists, populists, the second coming of Hitler. Oh my goodness. Donald J. Trump, Matteo Salvini, Viktor Orban, Kurz, the Austrian guy. Well, that's all we can do, and of course, never shut up. Always make noise, make noise. All right, so let's move on from Islam. We don't want to ruin everyone's night. And let's go to one of our other wonderful civilizational allies. So XL8 writes, the Confucius Institute, funded entirely by the Chinese government, ostensibly promotes Chinese culture around the world, overseas influence via the institutions of education, free books, free resources, free Chinese lessons, free trips to China if you are a leader in the educational system. Wow. Had you heard of that?
Well, I read that comment, yes. And it just brings to mind the strange situation we're confronted with from the Objectivists, who just can't get enough of communist China. as we've discussed before, China is getting worse. Now, I think all of us at the start of the liberalization process, or should I say at the start of the establishment of contact with China, I can remember back to the days of Richard Nixon, and an American president going to China had been unimaginable up to that time. But we all thought, well, good will come of this, because if we open up trade and contact and migration, then they get exposed to the benefits of capitalism and they'll liberalize their political system. And I think we were prepared to put up with quite a bit in the process of just waiting for this miraculous liberalization to occur. And you had objectivists saying, very rationalistically, well, they have to liberalize, they can't help it, because if they're going to liberalize the economy, then the politics will follow inexorably. Well, of course, that hasn't happened. And they now have this wonderful social credit system, which is straight out of 1984, where your every deed is monitored on camera and you get punished or perhaps rewarded if your behavior is deemed to be satisfactory. But all of this is going on, and we have Yuan Book insisting that the subject of trade with China is closed. It's a good thing, and that's that. Well, yeah. Go figure.
Yeah, well, fortunately, I have stopped listening to the Yuan Book show.
Well, who's going?
Yeah, but I have my sources who tell me.
Oh, okay.
My sources tell me that he's actually saying that China is better than the United States in certain respects, because of course, Yuan Book, as I said, before on the question of nationalism, as long as his fucking taxes are low, he is happy. That's that. That's the kind of intellectual people are following, and lots of them, and they just give him cash, go around the world, go to Mongolia to give lectures. I mean, this is completely ridiculous.
But why aren't rank and file objectivists rising up? Do your sources tell you that?
Because they're asleep. Maybe we should do a whole show next time about our criticisms of objectivism and all the, or rather I should say, objectivist commentary in a lot of respects, rather than objectivism per se. And we should see the reaction, because if people are will react in such a way that they will just shut off, and they'll be disgusted, and they'll be triggered, quote unquote, and they can't listen to criticism, then you have a cultist. You have someone who cannot think for himself. And
yes,
there's plenty of these people. And also, objectivism is does have this cult element. I mean, we see it. So if my experience tells me there's plenty of cultists. So there's something there.
I would have thought there'd be sufficient number of rank and file objectivists who were not asleep, who were outraged, and who by now would have done something. Because it's right there in front of us. It's not as though they're attempting to disguise the fact that they've lurched terribly to the left. They're full-on globalists, and globalism is our enemy. I think somehow they seem to act as though the whole world were one giant Galt's Gulch, and there was no reason to put up barriers between nation states, and nothing to distinguish one from another. But the world is not like that. It's not remotely like that. And in advocating that policy, they are actually offering succor to the countries of the world that are unfree and proudly unfree. They're on the side of totalitarianism. And that is especially manifest with Brooks' attitude to communist China. And again, I say, I find it incomprehensible that there hasn't been an uprising within objectivism.
Well, I think it's part ideological. It's part of the. This is a big topic. We'll have to get back to it next time. Let's just say, sneak peek. I think there's the cult element is only one part, maybe even a small part. I think there's ideological reasons behind it. So we'll get to that, what I think of that, and we'll get to what Linzio thinks next time, which will be in 2019, of course.
Yes, it will. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everyone. Buon anno nuovo.
And let's not forget, 3, 2, 1, Moga.
Moga. Make
Repudiate
objectivism.
leftivism.
Repudiate leftism, indeed.